Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Climate Week NYC. On behalf of Climate Group, we are so, well, thrilled, I don't know about you, emotional to be here because it's been a year. Yes, let's give it a round of applause. 18 months, and we did it, of course, virtually, but now this is here physically this year round, the 14th Climate Week NYC, and it's so wonderful to see you in the flesh because in the last 18 months we've had a health crisis, we've had an economic crisis that became a social crisis, but throughout it all we have had a continued environmental crisis. We need to talk about it. We now need to move from just ambition into action. We've got just over 40 days, people, until COP26. What are we going to achieve there? I'm so excited for some of the conversations we're going to bring, for what tangible action we can now take to task. And we want to welcome you virtually. I think we're streaming on, well, I'm joyous to be a TV anchor for Bloomberg, and I know that this is live streaming on the Bloomberg terminal, this is on Facebook, this is virtually across many an app. And talking of technology, we've got a few little housekeeping items for you. Now, I am a Brit, so I think with my stomach, so we know that there's a networking lunch, 12 till 12:30, stay for it. But we want you to work up an appetite to that lunch. We want your participation. You here physically and those in the audience virtually, we hope you've downloaded the app. There is an app. If you haven't, well, I can tell you how to do just that. Totem Hybrid application. Open the app. Opening day event. We want you to click remote and join stage and say, I'm ready. And then we want you to get involved in polling because we've got several questions we want to ask you. We want you involved in this conversation. We also want you to take to Twitter, to take to LinkedIn, whatever social media you like, whether it be Facebook, Instagram. Get on there and use @ClimateGroup, of course, their handle, and also hashtag Climate Week NYC. Make your thoughts known. I'm so excited for what's about to unfold for us now. And please do, therefore, as you get on your phone, I don't want you looking at me, I want you busy on your social media right now. I want to welcome to the stage Helen Clarkson. She is not only just a wonderful human, and I've been really enjoying spending time with her, getting to know her, but she's been building what is an incredible networking tool of climate, of course, the group, with the CEO since 2017, she's been there. But she knows how to build influential networks because she knows how to work not just with the public sector, but the private sector too. She's been doing that well, of course. She was with Forum for the Future previously, working with companies such as Target, Walmart, Nike, all having those difficult conversations, but purposeful and now impactful conversations on how to steer us towards a new, more sustainable future. And I like the fact that Climate Group is not only about a world of net zero, but a world of net zero with prosperity for all. Please do welcome to the stage Helen Clarkson.
Hello and welcome to Climate Week NYC 2021. It's very exciting to be here back on a stage in person. And this year we're hosting a hybrid opening ceremony. So some of our speakers are dialing in, some are here in person, and it's the same for our audience. And thanks to the wonders of technology, we can then all pull together behind one message for the week. This week is about getting it done. Last year, I used the opening of Climate Week as an opportunity to take a broader look at the year, reference the devastating time we'd had with COVID, the extreme weather conditions we'd seen all over the globe, and the role of the climate community in standing strong and supporting each other. And it's awful that I could give exactly the same speech a year later today. Because despite the best intentions of our global leaders, COVID is still shaping our lives. Despite the clearest blueprints for action from campaigners and scientists, the fires and floods are raging on. And despite how hard we've all worked in the last few years to get where we are, we know there's a lot more to do. So this Climate Week NYC, we're talking about getting it done. And exhausting as all of this sounds, I still think we can be optimistic about our ability to do just that. For a long time in the climate space, there's been little consensus, even less political will, and almost no money. But the world has changed. We've hit the public consciousness, and powerful people are now using our language. Climate change, climate crisis, climate action. And it's great to hear. But the question now is how we actually turn this talk into the action we've promised. As Greta Thunberg and other activists keep saying to us, stop telling us about 2050, tell us about now. And those of you joining me here today are from business and government, and most of us have been working in this space for some time, so we know it's not that simple. But the message is really clear. 2030 and 2050 targets are necessary, but they are not sufficient. We don't just want commitments and plans, we need delivery and action. So before I ask this from all of you, let me share how we're doing. At the Climate Group, we're known for bringing together large networks with strong commitments at the centre, such as RE100, EV100, and the Under 2 Coalition. And it's absolutely critical that all the members of those campaigns deliver on those commitments, and will continue to support their progress and hold them accountable. But we're increasingly pushing ourselves harder on how we use the power of the collective voice to create policy change in markets, which will lead to further acceleration. We've done this in the UK around the phase-out of petrol and diesel vehicles, and in South Korea and Japan around the availability of renewables. And we'll be taking inspiration from this success to move our work into harder-to-abate areas through initiatives such as Steel Zero. And we appreciate all of you who are members of our campaigns and part of the work. But it's not enough to just join one initiative. We all need to create a world which has climate at the centre. There's no such thing as a climate department of a business or government. It needs to be a climate business or a climate government or an obsolete one. And with that in mind, what's your business or your government going to look like in 2030? And how are you working to deliver that right now? This is your problem, not your successors'. There's no time for one last fossil fuel investment. You don't get one last coal mine. So I've highlighted where we're working and what change we're making. And to get change at the pace and scale that we all need to be thinking about shifting whole systems. So for our first poll today, we'd like to know which system you think needs our most urgent attention. So to vote, open the app or click on the poll button Caroline explained earlier. The poll's now live, and that will close during our first panel. It wouldn't be right to launch Climate Week NYC without acknowledging the COP process and the fact that all eyes are on Glasgow. In a few weeks, the climate community will be holding national governments to account, and we'll challenge them to be bigger and bolder and make equitable changes more quickly. We'll demand a just transition from governments all over the world. But we know that governments need our support and our action to make those commitments. And we all need to show them that they can make bold promises, and we will work alongside them to get it done. So this is a week for us, business and government leaders, civil society and NGOs, to showcase how we're doing just that. So share your ideas and be inspired by others, and let's ratchet up all our work ahead of COP. We've got to hold ourselves to account so that we can ask the same of others. So to close, I'd like to thank our sponsors who allow us to put this week on for you every year. Their generosity and commitment in times of uncertainty is something we're really grateful for. And thank you to all our partners who help us deliver our goals, and to all of you for leaning into this ever-changing Climate Week NYC. We say that Climate Week NYC is a moment when we showcase climate action and we talk about inspiring others. But it's also about inspiring ourselves, as we all need to do more. So it can be all too easy just to show up, to show your work, inspire others, say what you want to say, but we all need to be receiving as much as we're transmitting. It's clear that however much we've all done, we're all still at the starting line. So let's go, and together we can get it done. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the President of the European Commission, Dr. Ursula von der Leyen, to give the opening address.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank the Climate Group for bringing us together in New York. It is good to be here with you today, at least virtually, because our discussion could not come at a more appropriate time. You'll know that earlier this month, the National Weather Service issued its first ever flash flood emergency warning for the city of New York. The tale of Hurricane Ida brought dramatic rainfall to the city. And you will also have seen the dramatic images of flooding across Northern Europe and wildfires across Southern Europe this summer. They have left deep scars on our landscapes, our economies, and in our hearts. Of course, extreme weather always existed, but its frequency is new. These are no longer warning signs. Climate change is happening. The new IPCC report also marks this new sense of urgency. It is very clear about the effect of human activity on global warming. The main message is simple and sobering. Climate change is man-made. But the good news in it is we can do something about it. Our action matters. And this is why we came up with the European Green Deal. Europe has now turned into law its commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% in the next 9 years. And to achieve this goal, we presented recently a set of legislative proposals. We will put a price on pollution. We will clean the energy we use. We will have smarter cars, better trains, cleaner airplanes. We will grow our economy in a way that does not take more from our planet than it gives. And this is our promise, especially to our children and future generations. The European Green Deal is our new growth strategy. More than a third of the investments of Next Generation EU, that's how we call our 800 billion euro recovery program, will be dedicated to green and sustainable projects. We will invest in new technologies, new energy sources, and a more circular economy. And thus, we will sustain our prosperity and protect our nature. We want our European Green Deal to become a global Green Deal. And this is the ambition we will bring to Glasgow this year, to the COP26. At COP26, we need to see new commitments by major emitters. They, too, have to enhance their ambition and reduce emissions further and faster. And at COP26, we also need to live up to our financial commitments. We need to support developing countries not to fall into the trap of the fossil fuel economy, but to leapfrog to a circular economy that is renewable-based. Europe is already the leading contributor to global climate finance, and we are ready to do more. And we expect others to live up to their responsibility as well. We all start from different places. We all have different needs and resources. But together, we can make the difference. To keep this planet livable is our common historical task. And it's our obligation towards the generations to come. So let's join forces. Let's make it happen. Thank you very much for having me.
President of the European Commission there, so succinctly reminding us of all of our responsibilities. And of course, she takes the public line, but we also want to hear the private line. This is a public-private partnership. And I'm pleased to say that, of course, we thank L'Oréal for sponsoring the opening ceremony of Climate Week NYC. And we now want to hear from the chief executive of that very company about, well, how that business is getting it done. They have been for 20 years, and they continue to do so. Let's listen to the video.
Hello everyone, and greetings from Paris. My name is Nicholas Hieronymus, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at L'Oréal. As we gather for Climate Week New York City, still challenged by a global pandemic and a climate emergency, L'Oréal is honored to sponsor this year's opening ceremony. Our purpose at L'Oréal, create the beauty that moves the world, brings us an even greater meaning to our business. A responsibility to create a beauty that is inclusive, generous, responsible, and obviously sustainable. Now, more than ever, companies like ours must continue driving conversations towards actionable results that are in line with the reality we are facing. Like all of you, I was discouraged to read the UN IPCC report released last month. The conclusions that some effects of climate change are not unavoidable were sobering. This news was especially disappointing for those of us who have moved to drastically reduce our carbon emissions aligned with the 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario. But I'm not without hope. In fact, I am more deeply convinced that our actions matter, that there is more that we can do to help offset these effects. In order to do this, we must collectively recommit ourselves to achieving a net zero future. This is a vision I know all of you share, and I can assure you it is a message that all 88,000 of us at L'Oréal have received loud and clear. The theme for this year's gathering, fittingly, is getting it done. At L'Oréal, we have tried to embody this spirit of consistent, concrete actions in all our sustainability efforts. Years ago, we set science-based targets to align with the IPCC recommendations. By the end of 2020, we had reduced the CO2 emissions of our factories and distribution centers by 81% in absolute terms compared to 2005. And 72 of the 169 sites operated by L'Oréal had achieved carbon neutrality. Today, we are on track to meet our goal that by 2025, every site we operate worldwide will be carbon neutral, with an additional goal of being net zero emissions by 2050. Now, we are executing the next phase of our transformation through L'Oréal for the Future, a radical reinvention of our global business built from the urgent understanding that we have less than 10 years to act. This touches every footprint of our products across our entire value chain and includes production, packaging and marketing, accounting for our company's impact and that of our 1.5 billion consumers as well. But we know this is just the beginning. We will continue getting it done by setting and achieving ambitious goals. From using 100% renewable energy across global sites to eliminating virgin plastic from our packaging, recycling and reusing water in all of our industrial processes, and creating our products from biosourced ingredients. We will continue getting it done by activating our global workforce spread across 150 countries and using our entrepreneurial mindset, creativity, and obsession with going beyond what's possible. Part of this effort is our commitment of 100 million euros in impact investing dedicated to the development of the circular economy and the regeneration of ecosystems to strengthen their resilience to climate change. Because we know that reducing our own impact is no longer enough. We are grateful that our achievements have been recognized by experts such as the CDP, which has awarded L'Oréal a AAA rating for 5 years in a row, making us the only company in the world with this distinction. It is my hope that the latest IPCC report will help spur a productive week and result in ever more serious action towards our collective goals. We know that getting it done is hard, and we know it must be done. At L'Oréal, we have evolution and iterations built into our culture. We always challenge ourselves to do, to undo, and to redo, all in our drive for excellence. This critical moment is an opportunity to design and redesign our response to the emergency confronting us, to ensure that we drive the most ambitious environmental policies possible, and that we act aligned with the latest scientific knowledge. This is the only way to address the collective challenges we face. I feel strongly that L'Oréal's purpose, create the beauty that moves the world, calls us to this opportunity with a clear sense of responsibility to get it done. Let us all take our joint responsibility, work together, and get things done. Thank you very much.
What a forceful, impactful, and pretty beautiful message there coming from the CEO of L'Oreal. And we want to consider and continue this conversation. We want to drive forward on how other businesses, but how other public interests are getting it done right now. We've got a wonderful panel to pick up where Nicolas finished. And we're going to discuss about how really the IPCC report continues to show that we're in code red right now. We need to act faster. How are certain businesses already doing this? How are we financing it through institutions already worldwide? Let's pick up the conversation. On stage with me, Badr Khan. It is wonderful to have some time with you. Of course, National Grid US President, and we want to thank National Grid, who is, of course, a key sponsor for this entire week, so thank you. Alexandra Palt is going to be joining us to continue the conversation in terms of L'Oreal, Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer and Executive Vice President at L'Oreal, joining us remotely. And two, Ambroise Fayol, he is a Vice President of the European Investment Bank, about how to invest in the opportunities, how to ensure that you're allocating cash in the correct way. So first and foremost, I want to begin this conversation, and I want to remind the audience, continue to look at the poll, make your voice heard, get on social media. We'll be bringing the outcome of that poll in just a moment. But my opening question, and I'll start it with you, Badr, is what does getting it done mean to National Grid US right now? How are you thinking about it, embracing it? What key tangible actions are you taking?
Well, great. Thank you, Caroline, for having us here. Well, National Grid provides electricity and natural gas and clean energy solutions to 20 million people in New York and New England. And so we play a huge role in getting it done, as you say. And that starts with setting a target of net zero emissions by 2050. And we've lowered our emissions by 75% versus 1990 levels. So we've made great progress. But as you say, getting it done isn't about 2050, it's about what we're doing today. And so for us, when we think about the impact that we can have in society in lowering emissions, we think about it in three broad categories. Our impact in energy supply, the impact that we can have in transportation electrification, and the impact that we can have in buildings heat. And I'll just cover all three for a moment. For energy supply, we need to get to at least 80% zero carbon energy by 2030. Our role is to interconnect renewable energy generation to the grid. That starts with offshore wind. We're the only company to have connected a commercial offshore wind generator off the coast of the United States to the US. And we've already signed contracts to procure clean energy from offshore generators to supply roughly half of our Massachusetts and Rhode Island customers by 2026. And that's a huge growth from where we are today. We also need to connect onshore renewables. We've connected 100,000 systems already today. To get to our goals, we need to double what we've done in New York by 2025 and double what we've done in Massachusetts by 2030. We also need to make sure that customers are using less energy. In the last 8 or 9 years, we've invested over $4 billion helping customers make their homes and buildings more energy efficient. We need to double the rate of energy efficiency retrofits by 2030. For transportation, to meet our goals that we've talked about and that you've heard about today and before, we need to get to roughly 10 million electric vehicles on the roads in our territories by 2030. That's up from 100,000 today. So it's a 100-fold increase. Our role is to make sure that the charging infrastructure is there. Already, we've connected around 3,000 charging ports in our territories. Here in New York, with the support of our regulators, we've got approval for another 16,000 charging ports in upstate New York, and in Massachusetts, we're working on a program and a proposal for 30,000 charging ports. We also need to electrify our entire passenger vehicle fleet, clearly. And for building heat, we need to convert by 2030 nearly 5 million oil-heated buildings that are in our territories to low-carbon alternatives by 2030. For those customers using geologic natural gas, we need to start the transition away from that towards low and zero carbon natural gas and heating solutions. So that's a lot to do.
Yeah.
I think one point that's really important in this transition is that we make sure we do all of those things, energy supply, transportation, electrification, building heat, in a way where no one is left behind. The issue of of equity in environmental justice communities is super important, and one that I think we can make a difference on in this next decade.
And to ensure that people aren't left behind, it has to make economic sense, all of what is currently being actioned. I mean, just a small thing that Badar is taking on at the moment, clearly. I mean, a huge amount on his to-do list, and clearly great strides already made. Also, in terms of great strides, Ambroise, I want to bring you in here because, of course, you have the responsibility at the EIB of environmental financing, of climate action. You've been setting up the Climate and Environment Advisory Council, for example, the Climate Bank Roadmap just unveiled earlier this month. And what already is the EIB doing to help steer a focus to a more sustainable future with its own financing?
First, Caroline, thanks a lot for inviting me and inviting EIB, the Bank of the European Union. And actually, we have embarked on a journey that is extremely ambitious to transform the European Investment Bank into the EU Climate Bank. And for that, we have decided to move on a new energy lending policy and to adopt, as you said, a climate bank roadmap. And the objectives are both quantitative and qualitative. In terms of quantitative targets, we will increase the level of our climate projects from 25% today to 50% today, to 50% by 2025. And in terms of quantitative targets, we also have as an objective to trigger 1 trillion of new investments by 2030. And in terms of qualitative targets, all our projects as of 2021, so now already in place, have to be Paris-aligned, consistent with the targets that have been set in the Paris Agreement. That is the objective. Now, what it means is that there are projects that we will not anymore finance. And let me just give you 2 examples. We don't finance any more fossil fuel projects. And we are not going to finance any new airports, even if we can finance modernization of airports. But it means that we will do more of other things. We will do much more of renewable energy projects. We will do much more of innovative projects related to climate. We'll do much more of retrofit of buildings. We'll do much more of transport projects that are leading to anything related to trains or tramways or things like that. And actually, we are continuing to do our path towards contributing to the European Green Deal. And for example, for the COP26, we intend to present an adaptation plan that will be the first one for EIB. And also to include that the fact that we have projects that are Paris-aligned, we intend to also bring Paris alignment for our counterparts, for the companies that we finance. So that is really a very ambitious target.
We like ambition. That's what we're doing here, and thank you for outlining all the steps being taken, and really the seismic move that the EIB made with deciding that it wouldn't no longer finance fossil fuel projects. In terms of L'Oréal, remind us at the moment, in terms of the steps being taken, Alexandra, what does getting it done? We already heard from your CEO, clearly so much work has been done for the last 2 decades over at L'Oréal in terms of how you're producing the production, the energy use, but also to ensure that your supply chain looks healthier, that everything is environmentally focused. Are there any things you've had to stop doing, such as the EIB, or what have you done that's proactive, that's innovative? What does getting it done mean to you right now?
Yes, good morning to New York. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to come to New York, but thank you very much for having us. So I would like to say a little bit about companies, what means getting it done for companies. And I think what is important is that for a very long time, companies fixed their targets aligning to what they could do. So they reduced their carbon emissions by 20, 30, 40, 50, 80% in our case. Well, this is not sufficient anymore. We now have to look to climate targets and all environmental targets by looking into what needs to be done. And when we look what needs to be done, that gives us trajectories that are, of course, quite different, much more ambitious, with a lot of constraints, opportunities, and a lot of things where we don't know yet how we are going to manage them. And I think what is important, because unusual for companies, you would say, is we have to take commitments now where we do not have yet the solutions for everything. And that is a very important step because that means having a vision. Having a vision of where we have to go and not just an action plan. And I think that makes a difference between the companies that are really ambitious about climate change and environmental issues to companies that are not completely yet into the getting it done. So what we have done at L'Oréal is, yes, we have taken the commitments that are needed to be taken. So Nicolas Hieronymus, our CEO, cited already 25 carbon neutral Scope 1 and 2, zero virgin plastic 2030. There are many others. All the Scope 3, working with our suppliers, working with our consumers. We do not have the solution on everything now. But what we know, meaning getting it done, means now to accelerate. Accelerate a little bit above of what is difficult already. We have to go to the really, really difficult, hard things now, because that's what is needed in order to live up to the expectations of society, but also to the reality of the challenges.
Really, really difficult. I don't think there's a better way of describing what everyone's having to do, but it needs to be done, and it needs to be done in an efficient manner. And Bada, I mean, you were outlining just the sheer scale of what is having to be achieved by National Grid. What is perhaps one of the most surprising gaps? What have been some of the biggest challenges? You said a lot of numbers, 100x you have to increase the amount of EVs that are on the road, for example. What are the challenges? What are the limitations thus far that you've had to overcome?
Well, I think that when I think about what needs to be done, to Alexandra's point, there's investment that I would put into two different categories. One is large-scale, sort of systems-wide investment, and the second actually is investment at a consumer level. So let me just talk about them both. At the large-scale level, we need to, as a company, modernize the grid. We need to get to a place where we've got smart systems, two-way flows of power, where your vehicle is sending power back to the grid as well as getting it charged. We've got smart data that allows us to sort of optimize the grid in a way that's more affordable for customers. We need investment to connect all of this renewable generation that we're talking about. We need investment to connect all the infrastructure. We also need investment, and I think this is something we've been seeing more and more of in the last year, is investment for resilience. Last year in our territories, we had twice the number of storms than we've had in the prior several years put together. In the last few weeks, we've seen storms have a very real impact here in New York. So that resilience investment is important. I think lastly, in terms of system-wide, we need investment that you could call RD&D. So investment in technologies that allows us to make progress in scaling and driving down costs in the hardest to abate sectors. And the government is providing an excellent leadership here with the DOE with some moonshot initiatives around hydrogen and long duration storage. Second category is sort of smaller scale, and this is around how we engage regular people, you and I, regular consumers. We are not going to be able to get the emissions reduction that we're seeing if consumers don't start making choices that are different from what they're making today. But to do that, we need to ensure that there's a vibrant ecosystem of entrepreneurs, technology companies, consumer-oriented companies who are successfully thriving and operating, and we need to ensure that actually also coexists.
Alexandra, that must be something that you think so much about at L'Oréal, is the consumer. This is a journey of your end user. Are they leading you, or are you leading them? How much have they been a stakeholder in the purpose and the action that L'Oréal is taking?
So I think that it is quite the two-direction movement. So yes, consumers, when you ask them, they say, we want more sustainable products. We want to buy our consumption choices, express our values, get engaged. When That's what they say, that's what they also think, but when they then go to the department store, they very often forget and they say, well, that's just me, I cannot make a difference, and I forget that I should consume sustainably and I should make different choices. So actually, yes, there are more expectations. Unfortunately, they do not always translate in action. And so it's the role also of a company, by the innovation, by our by accompanying, by supporting the consumers in their choices, to make this happen. But it's true, it is ambivalent, but also another thing is that the tendency is very clear. So the tendency is going to more and more sustainable choices, more and more expectations. So this is a movement that is mutually inspiring, and we have to support it by innovations such as solid shampoos, leave-in conditioners, for example, because people don't know that most of our carbon footprint comes when you take a shower. So what are the products that we can propose so that your carbon footprint is less important? Yes, we can propose products, but we can also encourage, of course, people to take a little bit less showers, a little bit less hot, and that already changes a lot the level of carbon emissions.
It's a supply chain of a whole nother level when you're thinking about how long each person is showering for. Fascinating. We'll dig into the supply chain in just a moment. But Ambroise, your take, having to lead the consumer. I mean, when you said, oh, we're no longer investing in airport expansion, well, when we all pray this health crisis is over, I'm planning on hopefully visiting a lot of countries, but we want to do that in a more climate-friendly manner. How are you managing to think about the innovation that's needed there so that me as a consumer isn't left hanging, unable to go and visit my family over in the UK or travel to Europe as and when we all want to get together again and become once again a globalized world?
Well, actually, this is a very good question. But actually, I very much agree with what Bada and Alexandra have said. And if you had asked about what is the gap that I think is still missing, I would have said innovation. We need really to, I mean, we know that we are not going to reach the 2050 targets if there are not innovation that we are not even aware of today. So we need to find these innovations. We need to do that. For example, the projects we have with the Gates Foundation on Breakthrough Energy Venture to finance projects that are really early stage, or to develop projects like we do for floating offshore farms, that is wind farms that are much more difficult technically than even the offshore farms that we already finance. Floating is more difficult as a technique. So this is something that we need to do. The thing is, we'll need probably to do, in some European countries, the authorities have decided to stop flights when the flight is less than the number of hours that they think is able to be done by train. I mean, this is something that we'll probably need to do more, even if the issue is not that is going to be forbidden to travel to see your grandmother or your aunt in a neighboring country or even transatlantic. So I very much hope to be able to travel soon to the US again.
I wish I could take the train, that's for sure. But Ambroise, I'm interested. You said there that innovation is the gap, and previously Bada was saying how the administration in the United States, at least, is helping with sort of moonshots, as they're known, focused on hydrocarbon, for example. What are you seeing? Are governments worldwide helping with your view on innovation and the pace that it's happening?
Yes, really, I think it's a combination of public authorities, multilateral development banks, the companies, the civil society. I mean, everything is really targeting innovation these days. So I'm quite hopeful on that. I think also what we need to develop is not only innovation; it's also to make sure that it brings better life for everybody. But I said, no one left behind. We in Europe developed the concept of just transition, but it's really important that we can bring everybody on board.
In terms, Bada, of the innovation that you're seeing at National Grid, a global company here in the US, very much focused, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York, Bring us some more examples of some of the ways you're innovating, the way that you're thinking, who you've brought on board to work with to ensure that you are at the cutting edge.
Look, I think it's a great question. I think the one thing I'd say is that in this transition, we will not be able to do it alone. I don't think anyone will be able to make the progress that they're trying to make, that they need to make on their own. We will need to be collaborating, either with our customers or with our supply chain or with entrepreneurs and technologists or with the government. Just a couple of examples. We talked about consumer engagement just a minute ago. One of the things that we're doing is we've launched something several years ago called Connected Solutions, where we allow customers receive an incentive, so $20 up to $1,200 a year, for enrolling their connected device. That might be a Wi-Fi thermostat, it might be the electric vehicle, a battery, and their solar inverter. Actually, this past week, we worked with Rhode Island's Department of Energy Resources to enroll refrigerators to demand response programs. And as a result, those customers use less consumption, receive an incentive for doing that, and we help customers to use less energy. Another example of innovation that's important and an indication that you can't do this on your own, we launched a fund a few years ago called National Grid Partners. We've set aside $400 million to invest in entrepreneurs, in technologists who have got bold vision, bold ideas, and are looking to disrupt the status quo. If we don't have people thinking like that, we will not make this transition. And again, these aren't financial investments. These are investments that we consider strategic, that allows us to get insights into how we can transform our business and achieve the goals that we're looking to achieve.
Alessandra, what bold visions have you seen enacted in your supply chain? One of those that help you make the delightful products we all need and to feel good. What have you seen enacted to help your supply chain become more sustainable as well?
So I would just like to add on or build on what just Bada said. So I think nobody wants to be alone facing climate change. So it's not just that we don't want to be alone, I think, and that is very important. The more we are, for a long time also, of course, all these sustainability commitments have been a competitive space. It shouldn't. We don't want to be alone facing this. Yeah, we want to be as many as possible. And I do think this is important. I would also like to build on, yes, we need innovation. And we are working a lot on different innovations. We have worked with companies on a system for hairdressers that they can put on their water device in order to consume 80% of less water. We are working on a lot of different innovations, but we are also to be aware that we have 9 years left, and that in this 9 years left, we will not have all the innovations we need. So we really also need to drastically transform our models. And so I think these two have really to go together, and that is also what we invite our suppliers to do. So with our suppliers, we work on their carbon emission reduction, on efficiency, but also, of course, on innovation. We have worked on innovation, on new recycling methods in order to have infinitely recycled plastic, to not use any more virgin plastic. We have worked on new packaging, which use paper instead of plastic. So there are a lot of different things. But I do think we also encourage our suppliers, working with them so that they reduce their carbon emission, that they report on their carbon emission, that they engage in climate plans as ambitious as ours are. And this is really getting more and more becoming a condition of working with us.
Ambroise, remind us of how the European Investment Bank thinks about this as to where you need to put your long commitment money to work that isn't being solved in the private sector now. Because it feels as though the private sector's with the program, they want to be fostering innovation, they're working with entrepreneurs, but is it the scale, is it size of resource that the IB needs to fill in? What is it that the IB feels that it needs to plug the gaps on?
Well, we need to continue to work together with the business. I mean, we will not reach the targets if the private sector is not completely on board with us. And we know that. And actually, some of the changes that have happened recently have been driven by the private sector. For example, the investor community, with the debate about fearing of stranded assets, that has played a big role in moving towards more of green bonds and more of Paris-aligned investments. And frankly speaking, I think if you want to do more on the gaps, there are things that we need to do more with the private sector. There are things that we need to do more with the countries also and the projects in the field, project preparation in developing countries, for example. We need certainly more of this financing. And there are things that are more for the public institutions like EIB, also because when you take a lot of risks, this is something that is the role of a public institution. And sometimes also some risk taken by public institutions helps a lot in terms of leveraging a lot of private resources. And we know that volumes we need, it's not only gaps, it's volumes that we need. It's going to be a big challenge to reach the 2030 and the 2050 the objectives.
And what's amazing is, as you mentioned, sort of the power of the private investor. And 2021 felt like a real turning point. In fact, the summer of 2021 did. Suddenly, activist investors, very small ones, making seismic changes on the board of fossil fuel companies here in the United States, for example. Is it not just the role of the consumer, the role of the corporate, but the role of the investor as well? Ambroise.
It is the role of the investor as well, certainly. I mean, it is, and as you say, this is what we see. So the investors can help us speed up the rhythm of changing the economy towards a greener economy and a greener recovery after COVID. And I think this is what we see.
I'm interested in if you had sort of one wish, as we've got less than, well, just over 40 days, but until we get to COP26, the discussions. What is it that National Grid needs here in the US, but globally? Is it measurement, more defined measurement? Is it more defined targets? Is it more defined government commitments? What is it that you want to see sort of enacted in the next year?
You know, Caroline, I think that if you look back over the last year and a half, the pandemic has had a devastating impact, I think, on the world. However, there have been two things that I think have been positive, actually. One is that we come out of it, certainly I do, and most folks I talk to, with a greater sense of what's important, a greater sense of purpose, a greater sense of what needs to be done. And I think that is a force for good that we can leverage and tap into our people's emotions and desires. I think the second thing is that we've seen what we can do. We've seen what we can do when we put our mind to it. And so our question is not whether we can make this transition to net zero by 2030, 2050, but also the targets we set for 2030, but specifically how we do that, not whether, but how. And I think that is a tremendous force for good. And doing it in a way, as we've said before, where people are not left behind.
Let's not leave behind our audience, because they have been eagerly contributing to the poll that was previously enacted. And I'm wondering if in the next few moments we can look at what the repercussions of that poll have been as to where in the industries we think change needs to be had. But before we get to that poll and some of the answers, Alexandra, in the build-up to COP26, is there any more steer you need? Is there anything more L'Oréal would like to see enacted to make your life a little bit easier?
So I would say I speak first as a citizen. So yes, I would say once again it's very complementary to what Badr said, because it is we need to believe what we know, and that is still not happening. It's now happening for more people, but there are still many people out there who seem to not believe what they know, and so they do not act accordingly, and there's not sufficient, when I say political will, I do not just talk about governments, I talk about always people who have the responsibility and the capacity to act. So yes, if I had this magic button you talk about, I would have more political will to take the measures that need to be done. And of course, what we need is a clear framework as companies. So we do not need many frameworks in every country, a different one. There has to be a clear framework that is allowing companies to go in this direction. And I think investors can still go a little bit further too in their questioning, in their commitment to sustainability, as seeing it as an integrated performance, not financial and extra financial performance as two different streams, but an integrated performance that has to be evaluated.
Well said. Let's look at some of the reaction to our poll and see what the outcome have been, because we asked you which system needs our most urgent attention. 12% of you think it's built environment, but 42% of you, an outsized, basically not quite in the majority, but almost, think it's the energy system. Heavy industry is there as well, transport system. Food and agriculture, I'm surprised not more focusing on that, given food prices, some of the fertilizer companies that we know having issues at the moment, biodiversity, a key one, and unlisted. Bada, we have to go to you, the energy system first and foremost, and you realize that, of course. You've heard that plea for a while.
That's right. I mean, when we think about the emissions reduction that we can impact, it's energy supply, transportation, and building heat. But the area where we've already got, we've driven down over the last 30 years the cost of renewable energy is in energy supply, and so it's time to now build it, the rest of it, and connect it to the grid and ensure that it actually gets us to zero carbon energy. Transportation does need to follow, and I think the built environment, so building heat and process heat, I think are harder sectors and ones that we will need to do R&D today to be able to make the kind of gains that we need to see in the 2030s. But in this next decade, it's very much energy system.
And Amwaz, when you look at sort of the outcome there, is that sort of where your money is being allocated? Is it predominantly in speeding up the sustainability of energy systems first and foremost, or actually are you more across the board in terms of the focus?
Caroline, it's more across the board, and I think the danger with asking what is the most urgent is that you have a feeling that some things are less urgent, and they are all urgent and connected. So I see the result, and they are pretty clear. But for us, it is really across the board. And actually, I think that one of the most urgent crises is the one that is not necessarily recognized as it. For the time being, and it is having a small share in your poll. This is biodiversity.
That's such a key relevant point, and we never want to think that anything is less important than another, and that our role, our individual role, is less effective than others when put at scale. Lastly, we've got a couple of minutes left. I just want to ask each of you sort of almost one sentence or two on. What would you say to another business, another organization that perhaps hasn't embraced the focus of climate change quite as swiftly as you? Alexandra, I want to start with you. As we look towards this climate decade, what do you think would really pivot someone's point of view?
So if what we know doesn't do it by now, then I suppose that my advice, but I can more give advice on the how. And I think what is now necessary is the acceleration. I do think, like was just said, we cannot choose among the subject. We have to accelerate and take responsibility for everything. In order to accelerate, we have to think out of the box, not just innovate, but think out of the box and cooperate. And I think this is really something that also companies have to learn, because we were very orientated inside. That was what businesses were about themselves and their business. So now we have to go into a completely different direction. And I think what we are going to be judged on, and what our responsibility is for our collective future, is to accelerate.
And you're optimistic that acceleration can be done with your help and that of course, your private partners?
I'm optimistic because I see that everybody is seeing that we need to do much more and now. And actually, Bada was referring to storms in Europe. We have had the floods and fires that we had not seen in decades, and I'm not talking about the consequences in Africa. That is least contributing to climate change, that is probably the most affected continent. So the urgency of the crisis and the urgency to deal with it is such that that leaves me optimistic that we have the ability and the willingness to do much more through partnerships. And partnership for me will be key.
And goodness, Bada, we always want to keep a global perspective and know that Southeast Asia, Africa are going to be the most impacted. But of course, when it's close to home, when they do have once in hundreds years storms in New York, it sharpens the mind, I'm sure.
It certainly does. I would say there's a greater sense of purpose today, Caroline, than I think I've ever seen. We should galvanize that. We are galvanizing that, and we can co-create the world that we need to see with our customers, our supply chain, and our stakeholders, and companies working together.
An optimistic note to leave it on. I want to thank each and every one of our panelists. You've been so informative, so focused, and therefore impactful. I want to thank you, of course, Bada Khan, for being here in the flesh next to me, President, National Grid US. Of course, the joy of being located in the United States. Alexandra Palt, we wish you well over in France, Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer and Executive VP for L'Oréal. And Ambroise Fayol, great to have some time with you, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Thank you all so much. And I now want to invite back onto the stage Helen Clarkson, of course, of Climate Group. And were you surprised? Energy, first and foremost, the predominant focus in terms of the poll?
Yeah, I was surprised it came out so strongly. You know, it kind of underpins everything. And I think there's sometimes a perception that the energy transition is done. I think what the poll is saying is there's still so much work to do there that we need to get done.
And I know you've got plenty more polling action wanted from our audience,
so we're going
right?
to open our next poll. So go through the same process again. And our next poll is, how optimistic are you that we will see a just transition to a net zero world? And we've given you some choices ranging from very optimistic to very pessimistic. So you can decide where you sit there.
We're going to be discussing that in just a moment. I'll let you get on to your next discussion.
So we all know how important COP26 is. It's one of the critical moments as we get into this climate decade. But it's just one moment. And as we go into next year in 2022, all the focus will shift to Africa. The host of next year's COP, COP27, will be in Africa. And we think that the focus of that COP will shift to thinking much more about finance, international and sustainable development. And so for our next panel, we're joined live by two people who are going to play a significant and influential role in COP27 proceedings and delivery. So we have Vivian Yeda-Apopo, the Director General of the East African Development Bank, and Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt. And I'm hoping they're there because I can't see them on my screen.
Yeah.
They're there. It'd be nice to see them there. But anyway, thank you both so much for joining in. Great, I can talk to you directly. So Ms. Yeda and Minister Fouad, we just put a poll to our global audience asking if they believe the transition to a net zero economy will be just and equitable. So I'd like to start by asking you both what you think. So Ms. Yeda, maybe you could start.
Well, thank you, and greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. I think that, I don't remember what the rankings were, but I would say moderately optimistic that the transition will be just and equitable. And I think that will be because we all realize that there can be no net zero economy without the whole global community participating. And in that context, it will be necessary for the global community to focus in ensuring that we all move together and transition together towards a net zero economy.
Thank you. And Minister Fouad, same question to you. Do you think we'll have a just transition?
Thank you very much. I think that just transition to a net zero economy will be just and equitable only if raising ambition in finance and in means of implementation and technology transfer. Even the word of just and equitable, we cannot do a net zero economy without having the other part of how to do it, or otherwise we'll be moving without having the hands and legs and the tools to do so.
So as we go to COP27, a big focus is going to be on finance. And one of the big elephants in the room at COP is still the $100 billion committed by developed countries to the Green Climate Fund. Can you tell us about that? How important is it? How is it going to work? And why is it so critical to progress? Minister Fuad, maybe you could start on that.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that the 100 billion is I would say this is the big thing that we've been discussing since the Paris Agreement in 2015. And when you see how the progress has been made, not to reach the 100 billion, but to try to articulate how can we do that. For example, the creation of the Green Climate Fund, how it should be legally independent, how it would replace the gaps that were there in other multilateral funds. But the idea is not only reaching the 100 billion that is not reached by now, but the real problem is the access to those finance, even if it's less than 100 billion. So we have so many challenges ahead of the COP27, reaching the 100 billion. Secondly, if even less than that, which has not been achieved, how can we access finance so that we have more streamlined process, more simple and efficient access to finance that would really support and help the climate, other vulnerable countries for better adaptation? And thirdly, which is much more an issue that we will need to discuss, is linking that to adaptation, because the idea of finance is not only mitigation. You need to work on adaptation and have more projects into the pipeline that would support that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Yeda, do you think that's going to be met ahead of COP27?
I think coming on the back of the challenges that we have just faced going through the COVID pandemic and seeing the effects of it on the global economy, and then also experiencing shifts in climate and climate change, which has also devastated economies, particularly in Africa and in the agriculture sector. I would think that the world's attention will be sharply focused in doing what is right and making the necessary plans, also understanding that time is not on our side, and that these problems are not limited to geographical or political borders, and that we must really bring our attention, very much in the way that we did bring our attention to the COVID pandemic, to resolving the climate change challenges that we are facing.
Thank you. And public sector finance, obviously critical, but it's not going to meet the $2.5 trillion of additional investment needed every year to 2030. And many of the solutions right now are just too capital intensive for developing regions. So can you say a bit about what you see as the role of private capital, Ms. Yeda?
It's very true, and particularly in our neck of the woods. Our countries' economies are very dependent on exports, and some of them are, the main export is fossil fuels and products. And the challenge then is what you do with an economy that is based on maybe one or two products, but is also heavily indebted in terms of having developed the necessary infrastructure to exploit those resources. So we have pipelines and we have refineries that are fairly recent, which had been expected to be amortized over a 40-year period, and those will have to be obviously amortized over a shorter period or abandoned and decommissioned. So the question here is how to work with the private sector in achieving the necessary financing to diversify the economy, but also to maybe use the same technologies that we have for other economic activities, so that we are able to recoup some of the investment that has already been made in an economy that was dependent on fossil fuels.
Thank you. And Minister Fuad, a bit about the role of private capital from you, please.
Thank you very much. I think that the private capital, private sector has a key role to play in our fight against climate change. However, this should not really jeopardize the actual public funding that should be there as part of the Paris Agreement. However, the added value of having and working with the private capital is, first of all, the shift that we are seeing around the world in technologies, in moving further into the green industry, which we see as a very huge opportunity that should not be missed in favor of fighting the adverse impact of climate change, but also the great added value of seizing the opportunity that the private capital could also work on replication and upscaling of technologies that has been proven feasible. The renewable energy and the energy sector is a good example of that. But as we need a more rapid action for our fight against climate change, we need to duplicate the work of the private sector. More mobilization in other areas such as water, as resilient cities, as the coastal one, as more related to the transport sector, to the ecosystem services. You know, you need to make a photocopy of those so that they are all working in parallel.
Great. And then my last question, we've been talking all morning, COP26 is right around the corner, we're just 40 days away. What do you both hope to see coming out of COP26 that would give confidence and build confidence across the African region ahead of COP27? Minister Fouad.
Yes, thank you. I think it's very important that 2 or 3 messages that would come out for our continent from the COP26. And I think that the presidency of the COP26 is listening very well to that, and they are doing a great job on that. The first is adaptation as a priority. So we need to have more dialogue and start real dialogue on the global goal on adaptation. Secondly, the matrices related to not only the reporting of the developing countries, and that we have been in that process for a couple of years, but also how the developed countries would report back on the public financing and the support in that regard. So, you know, very, I would say, minimal steps that if came out from COP26, I'm not saying we're going to solve the climate finance, reaching the 100 billion and all the challenges to access to finance, but very minimal things that maybe if being resolved in COP26 will build the trust and give more confidence. And finally, is that we need to have also, the African countries need to see that what is being discussed and coming out in the rule book is their needs of better adaptation. The word needs could be translated in access to finance, in reporting process, in formatting on how can we do that, either in mitigation or adaptation, but it has to be there. And it has to be spelled out explicitly and clearly. Over to you.
Thank you. Ms. Yeda.
I think what I would hope to see is a very clear and concise roadmap as to how we move forward within the next 24 months and then going thereafter. Clear, tight deadlines in terms of funding and financing. Pragmatic financial solutions, taking into account, as I said before, that certain economies will be devastated by a shift away from their basic exports, which is heavy fossil fuels, and understanding how we can support those economies to diversify in the short term to other productive sectors, which will be tied to a green economy. I'd like to also emphasize the fact that for some of our economies, there will be other effects, including unemployment, and we need to also reskill people who have been working in the sectors that are most affected. So again, funding to help in training and retraining resources and directing them to other productive areas of the economy. So in sum, I think what I'm looking for is a pragmatic solution with an implementation plan that can be the focal point for the next 24 months.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for joining us today, Director General Yeda and Your Excellency, Minister Fouad. So thank you again to our speakers. And next we're going to share a conversation that I recorded last week with John Pettigrew, the CEO of National Grid. It's been an honour to work so closely with National Grid this year, and I'd really like to thank them again for being our headline partner for Climate Week NYC. I'm with John Pettigrew, the CEO of National Grid, our headline partner for Climate Week NYC 2021. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you so much for your support for this Climate Week. This week's all about getting it done, so I'm talking to John about what that means for National Grid. John, what are the most promising and practical large-scale renewable energy sources that will help us reach net zero by 2050?
Well, when I think about the UK, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is the 40 gigawatts of offshore winds that's going to be built in the North Sea and connected to our east coast. In the US, we've got a lot going on with solar and onshore wind, but we're also really excited about the prospects of offshore wind in the northeast of the US. And then when I think about our gas business, actually the work that we're doing with regulators thinking about decarbonising gas using hydrogen and biogas is a really interesting and exciting prospect actually for the gas business.
Great, but how do we ensure that all communities are included in a just and equitable way during our progress towards a net zero future?
Yeah, this is something that's really important to National Grid. We want to make sure that everybody participates in the energy transition. Last year we published our Responsible Business Charter that set out the things that we want to do. So to just give you some examples, we've launched an initiative to actually give 45,000 young teenagers the opportunity to be involved in the energy transition, coming from low-income communities that perhaps wouldn't have had that opportunity in the past. And things like transport are really important. 40% of all carbon emissions in our jurisdiction in the US come from transport. We've been working with regulators to ensure that the car charging ports are in low-income communities where perhaps they wouldn't be installed if it wasn't for the help of the regulators and National Grid.
That's great. And can you tell a bit more about that and how you're making the decarbonisation and electrification of transport a reality?
Yeah, in terms of decarbonisation, you know, as one of the biggest share investor utilities in the world, then we have a massive role to play in enabling the connection of renewable energy, and we spend a lot of time focusing on that. But then more directly on things like decarbonisation of transport, we want to walk the talk, so we're looking to decarbonise our fleet by 2030, but we're also investing in carports in our jurisdiction. So we've done 3,000 over the last 3 years, and we're going to do another 16,000 in New York, which makes it one of the biggest electrification programs in the US.
That's great. And just finally, what are your critical 2030 and 2040 targets initiatives in advancing towards net zero energy by 2050?
Yeah, so National Grid is committed to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% by 2030 and by 90% by 2040. So again, we're focusing on things like making sure that our fleet is electric, but we're also looking to remove things like SF6, which is an insulating gas, which is really harmful to the environment, and we're looking to reduce that by 50% by 2030 and to get it off the network by 2050. And then we're also doing obvious things like reducing our energy usage in our offices, and we're looking to reduce that by 20%.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you for the work that National Grid's leading.
Thank you.
Another great conversation there with Helen, and of course they want to thank the support, ongoing support there of the National Grid. Meanwhile, I mean, what I love about this whole conversation today is not just about the focus, the impact, the necessary changes we need to make to business models, to governments, to indeed achieve half of the things we want to do from a climate perspective, but how to do that equitably, how to do it with ensuring that this means growth, not in some way limiting the economy, limiting people's opportunity to build wealth. I think we need that conversation now to how to ensure that this is a just and robust transition. And I want to welcome our next panel. Two in the flesh, deeply exciting. So Dick and Finna, great to have you here, Senior Partner and Global Leader at McKinsey Sustainability. We also have Gloria Walton, Chief Executive Officer, The Solutions Project. And also virtually, we're very pleased to welcome Nancy Oman, SVP Global Corporate Citizenship and Sustainability over at the Estee Lauder companies. So it is wonderful to have all of you here, and I want to help each of you just tell a little bit about the work that you've already done, because we've got a corporate level helping other corporates. We've got, of course, from the grassroots level, helping individual impacts and thinking about a sustainable and fair change there. And also very much from the corporate level already in action. So let's start with the consultancy role to a certain extent, Dick. And what does a just transition mean for you, and robust? What is it turning into in terms of conversations that you're having on the daily?
Well, thank you, Caroline, for the question. So I think a just transition to us is not only ethically the right thing to do, I think it's a prerequisite to move at the speed and scale that is required. I mean, if we just look at some of the numbers from the transition, we're looking at $4 to $5 trillion or more of annual investment for the next 30 years. That's like half a COVID event or a COVID event every year. And you see how distortionary that is to the economy, what that will do. And our sense is that that number may actually be quite a bit bigger. If you look at the investment required going into the developing world, the investment dollars per GDP are probably twice what they are for the developed world. So, how do you get that level of capital formation? Hundreds of millions of jobs will be both kind of created and dislocated in some form. And not just workers impacted, it's going to impact consumers, energy prices, etc. So that's on the transition side. And then when you look on the physical side, the work that we've done before shows that, up to 200 million people in India, for example, could experience a lethal heat wave by 2030. That number could be 1 billion people globally by 2050. So just the numbers are massive. So the idea that you can move, do the biggest reallocation of capital in human history, change the basis of competition of the economy, and not have that be just, is very hard to think. And it gets back a little bit to I think the Frans Timmermans quote from the EU Commissioner. If there is no just transition, there just won't be a transition. So we think about it at McKinsey in terms of sustainable, inclusive growth as the answer. It needs to be sustainable because we hit real planetary boundaries. It needs to be inclusive for all the reasons that we just described. You have to expand energy access to services, and deal with some of the social dislocations. But there needs to be growth. You need to create surplus to fund the transition. You need massive amounts of upfront financing. You need to think through what that does to national debt levels. And you need to lift people out of poverty. So that's how we look at it. And then I just lastly say that, against that, we're doing 3 things. The first is we spend a lot of time and resource on research. So last year we did a big piece on physical risk, but this year now looking at the transition risk and the socioeconomic dislocation, and we find that it's not just the developing countries that are impacted. In the US, you see quite a bit of impact too. The second thing we're doing on the client side is we would like to become, or we aim to become, the largest private sector catalyst for decarbonization. We're trying to measure impact holistically across all our clients and take them on that journey and embed sustainability in everything we do. And then finally, we're trying also to work with NGOs in various forms, and Gloria and I were talking before, through things like McKinsey.org. We have an effort, just one effort by way of example, community-driven. It's called Rethinking Recycling down in Indonesia. So we're trying to give back in that way too. But that's a bit of a frame.
A bit of a perspective there. Gloria, as an award-winning organizer, an award-winning writer, when you're thinking about the just transition, how just is it thus far?
So I'm appreciating this question from a lot of different angles, especially in this moment that we're in, that's really requiring that all of us do more. And communities in particular are calling for us to center racial justice in our climate strategy. And at the Solutions Project, what that means for us is disrupting the status quo. And so we are at the center of kind of the junction between philanthropy and the climate justice movement. And communities are saying we need to be responding to their needs. And we know that historically, it's Black, Indigenous, immigrant, women of color, and other people of color that have been historically underinvested and disinvested in for decades and generations in some cases. And so doing more for us means we need to invest at least 10 million annually, which we are doing, in Black, Indigenous, immigrant, women, and women of color-led organizations and communities. And the other part of our strategy, in addition to the grant making, is amplifying the solutions that are coming from these communities. And so when I think about a just transition, that means that it's about centering the communities that are on the front lines of environmental degradation. And it's only then that we're actually going to ensure that we have a clean energy economy that benefits all people and communities. A just transition means labor and community alliances. We got to be thinking about jobs and apprenticeship opportunities, good jobs, good paying jobs with benefits, and how to transition workers from dirty industries into cleaner industries, and what's the entree point for new workers to enter into these industries. When I'm thinking about a just transition, It's recognizing that a lot of the values behind how we operate today are rooted in colonialism. It's a colonized mindset where we've literally commodified people and our places and resources and our land. And so what that has generated is mass consumption, mass production, mass waste, profit at any cost, meaning lives are often lost. And when you're looking at who's on the front lines, it's sadly racialized and based on class. And so we really need to shift away from those outdated values and start thinking about what does it mean to be sustainable, to be thinking about today as much as we think about tomorrow? What does it mean to think about a regenerative economy, to have an economy that's rooted in care and not sacrifice? So this is the moment. This is, to me, what the moment is calling for. And when I think about how we're doing okay, but we can be doing better. And the moment is requiring us to do better and to do more.
Well said. And Nancy, how is your organization, of course, the Estée Lauder company, like very much a family business rooted and still very purposeful with how it's thinking about sustainability? But you yourself, your background is so fascinating because you've worked with administrations. Of course, you worked under President Obama in 2011 to be the chair of the President's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. You understand how to do grass-level communication as well as within a corporate. What does just transition mean for you personally and for you at your corporate?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I just want to really acknowledge and thank Gloria for her remarks. The perfect segue, I think, into really talking about what does just mean. And to Gloria's great remarks, I think we were just at the beginning of defining that together. And at Estée Lauder, we are a family-founded company. I've been lucky in my career to spend time in 3 different sectors. I think what companies bring to the table, particularly family-founded companies, is our consumers. And to Dickens' early remarks, the understanding of markets and growth. And so what we really need to do together is to lean in on how does climate intersect with other issues? For instance, we have a big funding program in girls' education, and we're going to expand that. The bottom line is, if a girl is educated, the likelihood that she'll be the victim of violence or be able, in a positive way, to get a job and move beyond poverty is very high. So we need to take this, what we sort of a fancy word, intersectionality, this 360-degree approach as companies. And not only, our company, like many, we've hit net zero, we've hit RE100, and we're linking our science-based target now to growth. But we really need to double down and think about what is the democratic notion that we bring as sectors. And for companies, I think it's our employees and also our consumers, and get them engaged. We've had campaigns like the Viva Glam Fund, where 100% of the selling price, which I was lucky enough to run, 100% of the selling price goes to HIV/AIDS. We raised over $500 million through lipstick. So there's a lot of power out there, and I completely agree with Gloria that we are just now at the beginning, and we're here to listen and to partner.
I think that's so true. I think the consumer is desperate to make sort of impactful choices right now, but they have to be steered to a large degree. The consumer, the shareholder, there's so many stakeholders, the employee, that companies right now are thinking about, and they want to, live up to that moment. But what's holding companies back that you speak to at the moment, Dickon? Because it feels like we're all with the program, everyone's made grandiose statements, but now we've got to see whether people are walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And how are you managing to gauge, to measure what companies are actually achieving right now?
Well, to Nancy's comments earlier, I think, this is an all-stakeholder game. And, as we look at the transition, we think about it like a net zero equation of what it takes to get there. And right now, I think there's ambition, but that equation is not solved today. I think, physically, there's a lot of attention on the technologies need to be deployed, the land, the minerals, but I think there's not enough attention on the societal and economic adjustments. I mentioned that number, $5 trillion. How do you form that amount of capital? How do you redirect it to developing countries? How do you deal with the worker dislocation? Our sense is if you have the gift of foresight, at least to know where those impacts are going to be, you can deal with it. And then you mentioned the institutions and governance. I think we do need standards to emerge to measure carbon intensity, probably even on a real-time basis. We need mechanisms for companies to be able to share that, to scale new markets like carbon markets, et cetera. So, yeah, our sense is this is a real team sport, and I think companies are probably used to dealing with themselves and maybe a few other companies, but now you need to deal with NGOs, with technology providers, with governments, with communities, with investors. I mean, if you just take one example of like reskilling, right? We talked about the hundreds of millions of jobs that will move. Reskilling, you probably need the private sector to identify the gaps that are needed. You need an educational institution to deliver the training. You probably need an NGO to do the matching of employers and employees. You might need governments to help with employment insurance, with the transition. And that's before you get to the financial mechanisms of, how do I deal with upfront financing of all these new bits of machinery for low-income communities where financing is hard? How do I deal with the fact that unit energy prices are probably going to go up near term? And you've got to heat your house, even if you're sitting in Northern Europe or the Midwest. This is not just a developing country issue. So it's a bit of an all-stakeholder game in our thinking, and that level of collaboration and planning is not quite where it needs to be yet. And we need more sort of wood behind the arrow of ambition to make it a reality.
Wood behind the arrow. I mean, Gloria, lest we forget, we need a transition because right now energy prices are going through the roof, food costs are going through the roof, and who does that affect the most? Those at the lowest income. And how are the people that you're speaking to right here, right now, saying, are they saying I want to transition? Are they understanding that they want to be reskilled, or how are you having those conversations? What is it? What purposeful effects do the communities you're speaking to want to see done by these corporates?
Yeah, and I'll speak to kind of what people are saying in communities is that the transition is underway, and it really are grassroots communities that are taking the lead. Before, if government is there or government is not, the communities are really, the social infrastructure is the backbone of our society. That's who's showing up for communities during COVID even.
Yeah.
They've been showing up for our communities for decades when it comes to climate. And personally, I feel that I'm excited about us having this conversation and people now talking about racial justice and equity. And the only reason that's happening is because people have been organizing and building power for decades. And that's why, change happens from the bottom up. And now that conversation made it to the White House. And so now the Biden-Harris administration has also have a commitment to justice and equity. And so communities are saying we're already leading the way.
How are they leading? Like, what are they doing?
That's an excellent question. And so I think about one of our grantee partners, for example, Native Renewables, Navajo Nation in Arizona. There were 15,000 families that didn't have power. And it was Native Renewables that actually created a community-owned energy and solar grid. And they did training programs and employed people and created jobs and put power into 15,000 families. And just recently with Hurricane Ida, we wanted to deploy some solar generators to all the families who are without power. And we didn't know who to call for that. A lot of these families, including the Navajo Nation, they were once dependent on diesel, right? Like the diesel generators, and now they're all solar power generated. So we're like, let's call Native Renewables. And immediately they were like, this is who you call to purchase these types of solar generators. And that's what we did. And we were able to deploy them to families who were without power in Mississippi, in Louisiana, and most recently with this storm in Texas. And then I get excited about, another grantee partner, Reverend Leo Woodbury. The ice storm that happened earlier this year in Texas primarily, but it also hit Mississippi really hard. And these families were without power and water for weeks. And so it was Reverend Leo Woodbury's organization that found a technology that actually knows how to transmute air into clean drinking water. And they were able to supply that for their families. And lastly, I'd be remiss not to mention the leaders and the grassroots organizations that are really leading the country right here in New York. And that's our grantee partners, Uprose, New York Environmental Justice Alliance, New York Renews, and they passed one of the leading climate policies in the country, and that's the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And that is actually what helped to inform the Biden-Harris commitment, this 40% commitment to justice for environmental justice communities. So that's the leadership that's underway, and that's what I'm really here to celebrate. And I really, you talked about all hands on deck, Dickon, and that's absolutely right. We need our industry leaders, we need government, and we can't forget about joining forces with the social infrastructure. Right? That's really the backbone of this country, and that's often where we forget to invest, and that's really where we should be investing first. And that's who should be informing what these solutions need to look like, because that's going to guarantee that we're all benefiting from this climate economy.
I love the celebration. I also love the optimism, the fire that you're bringing, and I think I want to remind our audience that you've been giving your time, your input into a poll to sort of gauge your optimism levels of how hopeful you are for a just transition, and we're going to bring you the answer to that poll in just a moment. Before we get to that, Nancy, your take on the global perspective. We have such a unique vantage point of what's happening here in the United States with Gloria. What do you see as a global company where you're managing to make impact at a grassroots level with something on consumer base, but also just with your corporate leaders?
Well, we are a U.S.-based company, so I would like to agree with Gloria that the U.S.-based initiative around green energy and incentivizing that is critically important. What we've seen is that actually the structure of climate goals is profoundly democratic, because you have to solve for your green energy solution in the market that you're using it. And so that makes me very optimistic. And I'll give you an example. Gloria mentioned Texas. We are part of a virtual power purchase agreement in Oklahoma and invested in some wind turbines. When the Texas electric crisis hit, some of that energy was then redeployed from Oklahoma, from the grid into Texas. And so the scale, again, that companies can bring by solving locally for green solutions, plus obviously creating jobs in Oklahoma. So that makes me very, very optimistic. We have our job cut out for us, as Dickon and Gloria are indicating. To me, the biggest piece of a just transition is really listening. And we've been part of the HIV/AIDS movement, the breast cancer movement, Alzheimer's movement. We really, I believe, in the climate movement, need to think through what is a 360-degree approach to listening. And for us, we focus on the communities where we live, work, and source. And retail, as you know, is a profoundly democratic field. And so we have many, many leaders within our company who come from a vast array of communities. And then lastly, change starts at home. We have very strong racial equity and gender equity commitments across the company, and really want to encourage other companies to do the same. And we have room to grow there too, but we're here and we're listening.
How are other companies listening, Dickon? How are they harnessing the viewpoints of their stakeholders in all their ways and means? Is it quite often, is it different from one company to the next? One, it might be a founder who's got, or CEO who's got very much a focus and a viewpoint, or how much are they looking to within their base and within their stakeholders?
I think companies are, in the US, for example, I think that way beyond any kind of ideological discussion that may have been around 3-5 years ago or around the science. I think there is now clear conviction, actually, that, and a lot of this was driven out of the financial sector. I mean, the capital markets have led the way a little bit here. The financial regulator has started to put things like climate stress testing on banks, et cetera, and that is beginning to ripple through the system. So I think companies are beginning that team sport of engaging with different players. But,
Do you think they led the way? I mean, many people sort of criticize that the Federal Reserve was perhaps a little slow in terms of climate focus. Or do you think that really you could argue that companies led the way?
Well, I think that in a way, as the financial regulator, and initially coming out of the Bank of England, and I think Mark is talking a little bit later, that made the case that climate risk represented an existential threat to financial stability. Mm-hmm. And that has begun to ripple through, and actually has come from Europe to the SEC maybe faster than we thought. But that is It is a journey. I think what it takes from a company is, I think you need to have a view of the direction of travel here. You have to have conviction because everything is changing. So as a fiduciary, it's hard to make capital commitments on the basis of things that will happen but that have not yet happened. And I think you've got to have a point of view of where the future's going. I think you've also got to understand that this is going to be a complete rewriting of the basis of competition of companies. You've got to look at what the dislocation is going to be in communities. I think you've got to look at your license to operate. You know, and companies have a societal license, and I think they're beginning to realize that, and that taps back into community. So ultimately on this agenda, you know, you are your brother's keeper. And I think that is driving more collaboration, but clearly it needs to go at a significantly faster scale, as Gloria was saying.
Gloria, what's so fascinating is you've got these sort of, they need to be always together, whether it's be, you know, looking for sustainability, but doing it in a just fashion. And I think, interestingly, here in the United States, for example, it has become the focus of the Federal Reserve. In large part, the Biden administration sort of looked towards it during the election period, that they wanted them to look at the lower income, those that had been left behind. This wasn't just a central bank that was about, you know, ensuring that we didn't have strong inflation. It was more about, actually, we'll let inflation run a little bit hot because we want the most inclusive labour force we possibly can. Do you think that that's being looked at the same level of urgency as climate when you're looking at these two things always side by side?
Ooh, the same level of urgency. What I do believe is that communities will require it. And so one of the first lessons, some grounding foundational lessons that I learned, I did 16 years of community organizing in South Central LA, and those grassroots leaders taught me, one, that relationships are the cornerstone of just about everything, and two, that a lot of the conditions that our communities are living with every single day, your community, my community, aren't happenstance or circumstantial, right? Like it really is about decisions being made every single day by our decision makers. And the most important lesson that they taught me is that I actually had the power and agency to stand up and help to change that and to shape this type of society that I want to live in. And that's the work that I've been committed to. That's the work that I'm here representing as a philanthropic leader now. But a philanthropic leader that's really committed to the movements that are happening on the ground, because again, these are the infrastructure that's there whether we are or not. And so I really want to join forces with a powerhouse that really is, you know, immovable, right? And no one can shake them out of the way. So I do believe that it's communities who are going to make sure that there is some parity there and that we move in a more equitable fashion.
To that end, Nancy, do you feel that this 18 months that we've all lived and breathed and lost in, and the fact that we had a health crisis that became such an economic and social crisis, did we in any way lose momentum when it came to climate, or did that automatically go hand in hand?
Well, at least at our company, we felt like we accelerated. I think the knowledge, and to Mr. Khan's remarks earlier, I think the stakes became very clear, and this overlap of poverty and climate injustice and gender injustice has become so stark. I think we also really proved that we can be much more agile and move much more quickly when so much is at stake. And we certainly in our company created a small working group, and we were able to, you know, both fund Médecins Sans Frontières, $30 million across the year, but we also were able to hit our climate goals. And so I think it's actually helped. You know, it's a tragic scenario that we've all lived through, and certain communities have absolutely been hit so much harder. But at the same time, I believe it has created this very stark call to action of the stakes, and that we all have one standard of healthcare across the world in many, many ways, and we have one climate. There's that axiom that we're all in the same storm, but we have different boats. And I'd say, particularly as a luxury company, we are really doubling down and engaging our employees and our consumers in creating a global solution.
Well said. I just want to bring our attention back to your own optimism in the audience, as well as those of our panelists. How optimistic are you that we see a just transition to a net zero world? The answers were A, very optimistic, B, mostly optimistic, C, mostly pessimistic, D, very pessimistic. I'm wondering if we can bring up some of the answers to I think, unfortunately, you can see them, but we can't hear, so I'm just going to nip out. Looks as though 57% of you are mostly optimistic, and 36% are mostly pessimistic. Very few are very optimistic, and but it's like more are very pessimistic. Oh dear.
There we go.
I'm feeling a bit depressed.
So you have a 60-40 split there, Caroline.
Yeah. I mean, and not talking about your bond equity portfolio. Let's talk about mostly optimistic. Therefore, let's try and convert. How optimistic are you when you're looking globally? When your companies are global, we're very much focused here on what's happening in the US, and I feel real optimism by what Gloria is saying, the people on the ground making real life change. What are you seeing for the practices that, the global companies you're talking to, the impact in Asia, in Europe, and where's working best?
Well, I'd say, reflecting on this, the 60-40 split that Nancy was saying, I'd say we're on balance optimistic. I think you got to hold both optimism and pessimism. I think if you're too pessimistic, you get paralyzed. If you're too optimistic, you forget about just the massive magnitude. Again, largest reallocation of capital in human history. Changes the basis of competition everywhere. Trade will change. It's a complete restructuring of the economy. It's a massive, massive deal. The thing that gives me optimism, actually, Nancy alluded to it earlier, is the money has to flow into the regions that are most affected, into the communities that are most affected. If you look at the physical risk and transition risk, it is actually highly regressive. So the most vulnerable are most impacted. But therefore, the money needs to flow in and the jobs that will be created into those same communities. And I think that will be very stimulative. I think that the challenge a bit right now is, if you look particularly in the developing world, just the magnitude of capital that needs to flow into those regions. And we're not seeing money flow into adaptation at the scale it needs. We're not seeing it move into the installed base, which is carbon intensive, to decarbonize it. And we're not seeing it move quite at the scale it needs into developing markets. But
from private or from public sources, or both? Or?
Well, from both. I mean, ultimately, look, 80-90% of this will be done by the private sector. But you'll need the public sector to provide things like loan guarantees to take first loss. You'll need the public sector to stimulate some R&D into new technologies. So it needs to be catalytic and stimulative. But ultimately, the heavy lifting will be done by the private sector. But, we see, it's beginning to move, but the speed and scale going into the current economy and the installed base is not what it needs to be. I think the investment into the sort of net new green things is at a level we've never seen before. Venture capital, growth equity, all those things stimulating technology and innovations happening. But again, I liked the point that a bunch of this money and investment needs to flow back into the very communities that are most affected, and that should hopefully help drive a more just transition.
Are you seeing that money flow into the communities you speak to at the moment, Gloria? Let's be glass half full here, 60% mostly optimistic. Do you feel that, what are the sort of jobs that are coming into the communities already? You talk about solar, for example. What else are we seeing in terms of trade?
Just to answer that first question, the reality is that these communities, as I mentioned earlier, have been and are historically underinvested and disinvested, and that has been happening for decades, and it's still happening today. And so part of what I've been calling on and what we're doing at the Solutions Project is making sure that we center our investments into those communities so that at least $10 million annually that we're able to invest. We're here to ask our industry leaders to also see the social infrastructure and grassroots organizations as resources and partners to invest in.
What sort of projects do you invest in, for example? Can you give us one?
Yeah, so some of the ones that I talked about with the job creation programs, solar grids, people are trying to create resilience hubs so that we're actually responsive when disasters happen. Justice 40 initiative, so we have organizations that have come together to really maximize the 40% commitment from the Biden-Harris administration, although we recognize that that is not justice, right? We put Justice 40, but justice would be doing more, right? Because equity requires us to level the playing field, and 40% ain't it. But, people are saying, hey, government dollars are actually dollars that tend to miss our communities. So what can we do to make sure that we're prepared and that we can create that pipeline? When I think about net zero, I'm somewhere between the very optimistic and mostly, Because I do think, you know, as you said, as long as we have our industry leaders, government, and community joining forces, we can do our part to achieve a carbon neutral society. But that is not enough. And so that is what I hope we leave here recognizing, that just reducing carbon is central for sure. But for where we're trying to go, it's not enough. And if we're really centering racial justice and all of what we've been talking about, you know, these communities that are on the front lines of degradation, doing carbon neutral may mean that they're still going to be disproportionately impacted, and some communities will be better off than others. And so let's lean into what this moment is calling us to do and really transform our society and those values and move away from some of those values I mentioned earlier to those of interdependence, community, regeneration, reparations even, which is just saying that we have to repair the harm that we've already caused, because sometimes it's a scary word for people, but that's all that it means, is recognizing that we've done some harm, and so let's do better.
Nancy, let's do better. Talk to us about the optimism you have within Estee Lauder to continue to communicate with your own consumer base to make real effect change. I mean, are you looking at your supply chain? How are you looking at the ways that you said already you've ingrained it within the business itself to ensure that you're looking at a more equitable workforce, employee base? But what about when you're looking at supply chains as well, of being equitable but also environmentally friendly?
Yeah, 90% of our footprint, just to give you a sense, is in our scope 3, which is all of our suppliers. And so just to underscore Gloria and Dixon's point, that's really where we need to make the difference. And absolutely, with our new science-based target, in every business will be mobilizing to solve with their suppliers. And CDP supply chain is a big help there. As we move forward, I would say what we really need are, I would say, to kind of bridge Dickens and Gloria's world, essentially. We need local innovation in green solutions that benefit communities. And candidly, currently, we don't have enough of them. So I would say, as a call to action, we all need to invest in just local green energy solutions that are viable for companies like ours to adopt. Also, just on another front, we've invested recently in a group called Co-Impact, which just created a gender fund around the Global South. And as we know, women in the Global South have been disproportionately impacted by climate change. They will be funding local programs and supporting locally successful women-led programs. And I think we need to marry those two. And in the climate community, take a look at other civil rights movements and really bring in, through consumers, through employees, and through all of us as citizens, this democratic element and this democratic conversation. So I'm very optimistic about that and look forward to being part of it.
And Caroline, one thing that I'm, listening to you, it makes me think that the reality is that it's so easy to have a clean energy economy that still has the same structural inequities and income inequality and racism and sexism that exists today. And so that's why carbon neutral is not enough, because we actually want a society where everyone has access to clean water, healthy food, good jobs, affordable transit and energy systems, heating and cooling systems. And so that's the society that we're trying to build. And that's what I'm hoping will lean into that opportunity and not just stop when, we think we've reduced carbon.
Hear, hear. Gloria Walton, thank you so much for bringing that perspective, of course, the CEO of the Solutions Project. It's been wonderful to have you here in person as well. Dick and Penner, of course, the McKinsey San Francisco office. And a joy to have you virtually, but it felt like you were in the room with us. Nancy and Maun, thank you so much over at the Estee Lauder companies. Just please give it up to what a wonderful conversation that was. I think now we're very lucky to be talking about the opportunity to change things locally, and by someone who is perhaps relatively new to her current role, but certainly not new to the role of serving purpose and making change within communities. It is, of course, we're now welcoming to the stage, I'm very pleased to say, Kathy Hochul is the 57th governor of New York, of course, the first female governor of the state of New York, and a woman who is very much focused on transportation and transit, just as we were hearing from Gloria, that's so important in our current environment. So please do welcome to the stage the governor of New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn, for the introduction. Thank you all for coming. Why do you always pick the busiest week of the year with traffic? I mean, unbelievable traffic out there. So those of you who made it here in person, God bless you for your perseverance. Those of you who are zooming in from somewhere else on the planet, you're missing a great party here. We'll see you next year. We'll see you next year. You know, a gathering like this, and I've spoken before in my former role as Lieutenant Governor, is always so inspiring. I mean, this is the gathering of the most ingenious, brilliant thought leaders who also have great compassion and heart. Because you're not thinking about what's going on in the world today, as so many people do in their careers and their professions. You're thinking about the future and the responsibilities that we all have living in this day and age to the people who we'll probably never, ever get to know. People who live in the future, who perhaps will look back, and I hopefully will look back and say, yes, we are grateful that we have a clean planet to live on because of the people the last century or 2 centuries ago were the visionaries who gathered at places like this. So I put a lot of weight on your shoulders to get this right and to give us the brilliant ideas that'll help charge that path forward, but I have great optimism and hope and confidence in every one of you. And you know, we're talking about reaffirming our commitment to protecting Mother Earth. Now, Mother Earth has been pretty battered and bruised lately, and when you think about man's assault on Mother Earth, and unfortunately, it mostly is man. I mean, I'm sorry, they built the factories, right? I mean, they did all the smokestacks. I didn't see any women building smokestacks or dumping polluted water. You know what I'm talking about. And I love the men too. So we're good. But just, it's a statement of fact, right? It's man's assault on Mother Earth, and I want to stop that. I want to try to stop that. And you know, I'm a politician. I understand what that means. People think, oh, you all talk big, right? You all talk big. Yeah, we talk big, of course we do. But we also, in the state of New York, we act big. We do big things. And there is no challenge, whether it's throughout our history or our current challenges, that we don't meet with an aggressive approach. That's what New Yorkers do. It's in our DNA. Get used to it. But I want to tell you, all of us come to this, and we all come with our own perspectives. What led you to sit in these seats today or be out there around the globe participating in this incredible exchange of ideas? For me, it's deeply personal. It goes back to my childhood, which is a long time ago. I won't name any years, but it's all on Wikipedia, so go figure it out. I grew up in Buffalo. I grew up and was born. Any Bills fans in the audience? Okay, all right. Nice game yesterday, right? I mean, I just want to say 35-0 against Miami, but I diverge. Our parents started in a trailer park and lived in Lackawanna, like many people do, working class people, and my playground was Lake Erie. At the time, late 60s, early 70s, Lake Erie was a cesspool. I mean, you literally could see the Bethlehem steel plant. By night, the sky was lit up with this lava-like glow because as they were dumping, I don't even know what it was, toxic chemicals into the lake. And at night, you couldn't even imagine that people would be swimming in it by day, except we were. That's how we swam during the day, into this toxic water, unbeknownst to our parents, obviously, I hope. And also, when you drove in a car through Lackawanna, you often couldn't see, and I'm not exaggerating, because you were enveloped in an orange cloud of smoke that had just been discharged from the smokestacks, and people lived in these communities. So it's hard to believe I'm still alive when I think about this, but I'm healthy, I'm good. But so many people did succumb to environmentally induced illnesses. I mean, I grew up hearing every day for years about Love Canal, not far from where we lived. So the environmental movement and the whole idea of Superfunds really emerged out of this environment that I was a child in and was very much paying attention to. And I said to my father, who worked at the steel plant, as did his immigrant father and many others who escaped poverty by working at a steel plant, I said, Dad, didn't people know? Didn't people ask questions? Didn't people wonder why people live like this? He says, we didn't. We didn't. This is just how it was. These were jobs. Nobody knew better. We didn't know we could do better even in the 60s and 70s until we started having more enlightened people, and even the beginning of Earth Day. And I was a kid in school starting my first Earth Day club and my ecology club and all those fun things I did as a little activist that I still am today. But that really does have an effect on you, which brings me to today and the depth of my passion for making sure that no one has to live in a contaminated environment anywhere in this state, this country, or this world. So I'm really proud to lead a state that has the nation-leading climate goals. But goals are goals. I want results. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And I think about what I just dealt with as I've been governor, it'll be 4 weeks tomorrow. Okay. It's amazing. And of course, my first challenge, other than the entire subway system shutting down on my 5th day, and that's another story, I'm not making this up. The first major challenge I had was a environmentally induced climate disaster. If you saw, no matter where you lived, and if you're a New Yorker, you felt this deeply, the skies literally opened up. Hurricane Ida was relentless. The forecasters did not see the track of it coming to the very populated Northeast. I had literally the day before had called the governors of Mississippi and Louisiana to say, any way I can help you. I'm only on the job a couple of days, but we're in New York, we always want to help. The next day, people were calling me. We did not foresee this coming. And what I saw was literally the skies opened up. And what was quite extraordinary is 1 week earlier, the previous hurricane from the week before, I mean, I feel like I'm living in Florida. We had a Hurricane Henri, dumped nearly 2 inches of rain on Central Park, broke all records, shattered them. Oh my God, this is once in a 500-year event. 10 days later, we had over 3 inches dumped an hour on Central Park, and our city was flooded. And that just was a warning shot. I mean, it was just extraordinary what we went through. And what is seared in my memory is not the Niagara Falls opening up and insane amount of rainfall hitting our streets, but the aftermath. When I walked through the streets of Queens, and sadly it was Elmhurst, which had been the epicenter of the global pandemic for a long time, so this community had been hit hard. And I walked down an alleyway and I saw the people just picking up the pieces of their lives, the ones who were lucky enough to have survived, I'm talking about, because people literally saw the water rushing into their homes. They lived in basement homes, and there was no escape route out the back. We had 12.5 people lose their lives in this environment. So you talk about my priorities, why I'm so intent on making sure we get this right. I will never forget the images of those people trying to pick up the little piece of their lives, literally picking up baby shoes off the floor and washing them in a bucket of dirty water so their child didn't go barefoot in the city of New York. So we're here. And I do believe that there are opportunities lying before us, and we just have to have the courage to seize them. And I'm not afraid of a fight. New Yorkers are not afraid of a fight. And this is the existential fight of our time. You cannot dispute that. And I believe that every child deserves to grow up with clean air, clean water, clean life. And we owe that to them as adults. And I wish someone had felt they owed it to us when I was a child. And that's the wrong I want to correct here. So New York will lead in the green energy economy and good paying jobs. And I'm not just talking about good paying jobs for people that you normally think of in these industries. I want to make sure that these jobs are populated by people from the most underserved communities in our state. This is how we put them on a trajectory of having good, sustainable jobs that'll be there in the future, that they can support their families and lift themselves out of poverty because we got them into a job training program. We got them a mentor from a company that's investing in clean energy. I believe we will do that, and we'll do it very successfully. So we know it. Thank you. Let's give that a round of applause. I want every state to do this. But here's what we're going to do, and I'm going to make some announcements here, because I could tell you stories all day, but I won't do that. I know you've got other really important people to hear from. We're going to take some major steps to build a more resilient New York and accelerate our progress toward nation-leading emissions goals. I already signed into law, again, on the job 4 weeks here, I'll tell you what I've done in 4 weeks. We are accelerating the transition to more zero-emission vehicles in New York by 2035. Less than 15 years from now, we'll have zero-emission vehicles. Over 1 million vehicles will be on our roads by 2035, and I'm excited about this. We are continuing to invest in electric vehicles. I'm going to give you a little quiz here. Where was the first electric vehicle invented? Buffalo. Decide. It was called the Buffalo Electric Vehicle Company, built in, and I'll tell you, it's a sad story, you can look it up, but that would have been the wave of the future, because it was hard for women to go out on the Sunday drive with their big gowns on to drive the new vehicles. They wanted a little freedom from their husbands. Maybe the guys are home watching football, I don't know, but they wanted to get out, and it was easier for them to crank up an electric vehicle than to do it otherwise. So they invented these, but then the big oil companies came in and convinced everybody that that was so ridiculous to go electric vehicles, let's do oil. So imagine the world we would have had if people had listened to the folks in Buffalo. I digress. We are now on par with California with respect to our zero-emission vehicles. And when you take the power of New York and the power of California, that's over 58 million people who will now be leading the way toward more electric vehicles on our roads by 2035. We also will be accelerating the zero-emission truck sales on our streets. We also invested, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, we've invested money. I don't just say we're going to hire more people from underserved communities. We invested $6 million to launch the Climate Justice Fellowship, which supports fellowships to get people in disadvantaged communities to support clean energy efforts and get people jobs. We also partnered with New York City on a $24 million program to fund electrification in New York City's affordable housing. This is transformative. We need to do much more of this in the housing stock that needs a lot of work, but let's make sure that we are electrifying it in a clean way. We also committed $107 million to start construction on Staten Island's Living Breakwaters Coastal Resiliency Project, because the next storm, they will not be able to survive if we do not make these investments now. We're going to do that. And let's get excited about solar goals. That's all my first month, but right now, I said, what are we doing today, folks? Okay, we've got another day. Time's slipping fast. You know, we have to save the planet now. I'm launching 2 major steps to accelerate the transition into a cleaner, greener future. And I told you we're kind of ambitious here. We're not content to be nation leading anymore. We want to be global leading. And that means setting even more ambitious goals. We're going all in on solar, and our landmark 2019 climate leadership. We ought to clap. Good. Now, where I live, I don't see a lot of sun, but that's okay. You know, I think it's going to work. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act set an aggressive goal of producing 6 gigawatts of electricity from solar by 2025. But the good news is we're almost there already. 2025, we're going to beat that by years. So I said, okay, that's not good enough. So today I'm announcing we're going to double down and expand that goal to build out at least 10 gigawatts of solar by 2030. No one said we're going to do that before. I'm saying it right here, right now. We're going to get it done. I've directed NYSERDA to develop a solar roadmap to find our way there and focus on disadvantaged and low-income communities. And what excites me the most, we're going to have over 20,000 brand new jobs in the solar industry alone. This will result in powering over 1.7 million homes and save our customers $880 million, along with $9 billion in private investment. And I want to thank the team from the state of New York, Doreen Harris and New York Sun, for all the work they've done to achieve. Let's give them a round of applause. These are the visionaries who are part of your state workforce who get things done, and I'm so proud to be associated with all of them. But here's another announcement for you. Transmission Award. Everybody's been wondering what we're going to do about this. We need to build new sources of renewable energy, and how do we bring all that clean energy, renewable energy, which is largely in upstate. Geographically, it's mostly upstate, but the population is right here. How do we get it down to New York City where the needs are the greatest? And right now, because of that disconnect, New York City has had to rely so heavily on fossil fuels because it's not hooked up to renewable sources upstate. And many of those fossil fuel polluting, those plants are in black and brown and low-income communities all around the city. They're everywhere. And we're going to fix that. We're going to fix that. Let's turn the page on the city's long-standing reliance on fossil fuels and bring new jobs instead to those communities. So right now we were reviewing, this is what we were doing just last week, we were reviewing various contracts that were out there. We did a bid for proposals to bring a plentiful supply of clean, renewable power into the city. Got down to the final two. People are traditionally going to pick one or the other, right? And I ask simple questions. Why not both? Why not do both? I mean, why would we do one now, see how it works, and then do the other one maybe in a decade or so? I say if we're really serious about getting the job done and relying less on fossil, never on fossils, and more on renewables, let's do both together. So today I'm announcing we're awarding not one, but two contracts that will absolutely accomplish these goals. First, a new 174-mile new transmission project that'll go from Delaware County to the Rainey substation in Queens. And secondly, a 339-mile new transmission project that'll extend from Quebec in Canada all the way to the Astoria substation in Queens. These historic projects will pair wind, solar, and hydropower, will be brought from upstate in Canada to service and bring nearly 18 million megawatt hours of renewable energy to New York City annually, enough to power 2.5 million homes a year. Think of these as two extension cords. Thank you. And those of you who need a simple image, because, well, you actually know in this, you're all really smart, but just extension cords. We're bringing extension cords down the state and plugging them into New York, okay? This is exciting. This is exciting to power homes and businesses all over. And, you know, my favorite topic, creating more jobs, over 10,000 good-paying jobs, attracting billions of dollars in private investment. And finally, this will play a major role in allowing New York City to retire its reliance on fossil fuel plants that have been polluting too many parts of our city. We're going to get that done. We're going to get it done as soon as we can. We'll be shutting down unhealthy facilities like the Astoria facility, which is known as, in the part of the city known as Asthma Alley. Okay. We're also beginning the process to transition from dirty power plants like the Big Alice. Okay, if you live in New York City, you know what I'm talking about. These will be sent to the Public Service Commission, and we're going to make sure that we do this in a smart way, sensitive to the environmental habitats along the way, and make sure we're investing more clean money here. It's impossible to overstate how important that is for New York City. As we left reliance on Indian Point nuclear power, and we're transitioning to wind, solar, and hydropower, this is a major, major initiative to deliver clean, healthier air and more electricity to New York City. And so, I think that's all I have for announcements. We can talk about my predictions for the next year. But just to wrap up, my friends, I will continue to be as bold as I possibly can. You bring before me the ideas that come out of a conference like this and say, this is how we can lead our way into the energy future, create jobs, and make up for all the past destruction of beautiful neighborhoods where children are still growing up with environmental crises like I did as a child. I want to fix that, and I'm impatient. That's one thing you'll know about me. I'm very impatient. So I hope that you'll see that New York State is not just talking the talk, but we're going to walk the walk, and we're going to make sure we get this done. And someday, my father's 85 years old, and I'm going to say, Dad, I know we had that conversation a long time ago, how people were able to live like that. I am not a grandma yet, hope to be soon, but I want my grandchildren to never have that question asked of me. How did you let that happen when you were in charge of things? How did you let that happen to our environment, Grandma? I'm not going to have to answer that question because we're going to get it right this time. And we're going to make up for a lot of harm that was done in the past, but I'm excited. I am fired up to help lead the energy revolution, the green revolution, because it's long overdue, my friends, and you are part of the solution. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Take care. Wow. Impatient. 4 weeks on the job, less than, and already achieving so much, and certainly talking about a more just transition there. So wonderful to hear, of course, from Kathy Hochul, 57th Governor of New York, and talk about well, trailblazing women in focusing on climate from the early 80s is our next speaker. Of course, she's another glass ceiling shattering female in public policy making. Gina McCarthy is going to be leaving us now with some comments, of course. The White House National Climate Advisor, used to be head of the EPA, CEO of NRDC in health and environment since the 80s, as I say. Please do give a round of applause as we listen to Gina McCarthy. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for the opportunity to participate in Climate Week NYC, together with so many leaders who are working to make the 2020s a transformative climate decade. I'm joining you virtually today, but I was actually in New York City just a few weeks ago. I was traveling with President Biden to survey the damage from Hurricane Ida, an awful storm that made landfall in Louisiana and still had enough power once it reached the Northeast to wreak havoc in New York and New Jersey as well. We walked through neighborhoods that had been torn apart and met with families who lost their homes. And storms like Ida, disasters that used to be a once-in-a-century event, are now hitting us back to back. We're seeing with our own eyes that the climate crisis is here, and everything is at stake. The scientific community has told us loud and clear that we have to rapidly reduce our emissions to prevent even worse impacts. There's no question about that. The only question is, how will we get this done? And my main message and my pledge to you is that the United States is back. The Biden administration is committed to using every tool we have to tackle the climate crisis. President Biden was inaugurated just 8 months ago today, but on his very first day in office, he got us back into the Paris Agreement and back into the global effort to build a safe and an equitable future. In the 8 months since, our administration has been working day and night to make the entire federal government part of our climate response. We've created our first ever National Climate Task Force, which brings together federal agency leaders to achieve our 2030 goal of reducing emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels. We're working to make every sector of our economy low carbon so that we can reach net zero by 2050. Just to give you a few examples. In the power sector, we've set a goal of getting to 80% clean electricity by 2030 and 100% clean by 2035. On transportation, our 2030 target is for half of all new vehicles sold to be EVs, yes, electric vehicles. And for aviation emissions to drop 20% by ramping up the use of sustainable fuels. And to advance our natural climate solutions, we have launched a new America the Beautiful initiative to conserve 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030. And to get all of this done, we're working with Congress to deliver on the President's Build Back Better agenda, because this agenda is all about how climate action also means job creation. It includes historic investments to create millions of good-paying union jobs as we rise to the climate challenge. We'll build resilient and sustainable infrastructure so that our cities, suburbs, and rural areas have the modern systems that we need to live and work and get around while staying protected from extreme weather. We'll lead a clean energy revolution, creating new opportunities for researchers, manufacturers, engineers, and construction workers. We will build and upgrade housing so that everyone can live in an affordable, energy-efficient home with lower emissions and lower energy bills. We'll support innovation across our economy, from farmers who are advancing climate-smart agriculture to industrial facilities that are adopting low-carbon materials and processes. And we'll ensure clean air and clean water so that all our communities can be healthy and thriving. And as we continue to push for these investments in Congress, we've simultaneously been taking a whole-of-government approach to tackle the climate crisis and advance environmental justice. Right now, all our federal agencies are developing climate action plans so that they can increase the resilience of their programs and their facilities. We're also leading by example to reduce our emissions and enhance sustainability of our federal lands, our buildings, and our vehicle fleets. Our financial regulators are taking climate risks into account throughout our own federal programs and our supervision of insurance companies and pension plans and the broader financial system. And after 4 years of dangerous rollbacks of our environmental and public health protections, we're restoring scientific integrity to all of our regulatory work. And all of these efforts are prioritizing justice for the communities that have been far too long overburdened by pollution and that historically have been marginalized and underserved. We have a new Justice 40 initiative to make sure that these disadvantaged communities are receiving at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy. We're also supporting the economic revitalization of communities hit hard by coal mine and coal power plant closures to ensure benefits, protections, and new job opportunities for those workers. And it's not just the federal government that's leading on a just transition. We're partnering with state, local, and tribal governments on everything from transportation planning to disaster preparedness to approvals for major wind and solar projects. And throughout all of this, our administration recognizes that getting it done on climate is not just about emission levels. It's also about economic opportunity and about innovation. It's about worker empowerment and environmental justice. And it's about creating a more inclusive, healthy, and resilient society. That's what we're committed to doing. And we look forward to continuing to work with every sector and every community to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say thanks to Caroline and thanks to all of you for joining us here today. Once again, it's been an incredible opening ceremony of Climate Week NYC. Some additional announcements there, which I hope you agree was worth taking us a little bit over time. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors and our partners and the wider climate community for pulling around this week. While we've got the pleasure of curating this every year, it only works because so many other organisations put their weight behind it. And I also want to say a final thank you to the staff at Climate Group. There's a lot of people that delegates and participants never meet who work really tirelessly to deliver this work. So thank you to my whole team, the ones in Delhi, London, and New York. We've talked about getting it done, and we've talked about the importance of a just transition. We know that COP26 is going to be a pivotal moment, but we also know that climate action doesn't stop on the 12th of November, which is why we wanted to start that conversation around COP27. So please enjoy the week, and we look forward to seeing many of you here in New York as well as in Glasgow in November. We're going to take a very short break and see you shortly for Race to Zero and Race to Resilience, delivering on the promise of Paris. Thank you.